A powerful and persistent storm pattern is taking shape across the United States, and this isn't just a brief event. It's not a single round of severe weather that moves through and then clears out. Instead, the current setup looks like a continuous stream of storm systems, expected to develop day after day for the next 7 to 10 days. These storms could bring damaging winds, large hail, and possible tornadoes across a broad region stretching from the southern plains through the Ohio Valley and into the southeast. What makes this situation especially challenging is how difficult it is to communicate clearly. This won't be a clean, well-organized outbreak where you can pinpoint a specific day or city as the highest risk. The pattern will be chaotic and unpredictable. You could have clear skies around midday, only to face a severe thunderstorm warning by mid-afternoon with little indication from the morning forecast. That kind of setup can actually be more dangerous than a typical organized outbreak because it can catch people off guard. With that in mind, let's walk through the forecast as clearly as possible, even with the uncertainty involved. Before diving into the day-by-day details, it's important to understand what's actually driving this pattern, because the jet stream setup explains why this storm train isn't going to move out anytime soon. Right now, there's a strong and persistent deep in the jet stream extending across the Rockies into the central United States. This deep, or trough, is essentially acting like an on-ramp for moisture. It's pulling warm, humid air northward from the Gulf of Mexico while also drawing Pacific moisture eastward. All of that moisture is being funneled into the central and southern plains and the Tennessee Valley, right into prime storm territory. As long as this jet stream pattern holds, and current models suggest it will remain in place through at least the weekend, the atmosphere over the central US will stay primed for severe weather each afternoon. The instability levels aren't just borderline, they're quite high. Wind shear is also strong enough to support supercell thunderstorms and organized storm systems on multiple days. In short, all the key ingredients for severe weather will remain in place across a large part of the country for the days ahead. That's the broader setup, and why this isn't just a couple of rough days, but an ongoing storm train. As we move into early next week, though, the pattern becomes a bit more complex. Forecast models show a ridge starting to build over the Great Plains around Monday and Tuesday. At first glance, that might seem like good news. And to some extent, it is. It can temporarily limit the most organized, large-scale severe weather setups for a few days. But that ridge doesn't completely eliminate the threat. Instead, it changes the nature of it. Rather than well-organized, easy-to-anticipate outbreaks, the pattern shifts toward what meteorologists call mesoscale severe weather. And honestly, that term will likely define this entire 7 to 10 day stretch. Mesoscale refers to smaller, localized features rather than the large, clearly defined systems that show up in models days in advance. On these kinds of days, the atmosphere still has plenty of instability and moisture. The difference is that storm development depends on smaller, harder to detect triggers. Triggers for these storms can be subtle, things like a sea breeze boundary, leftover outflow from an earlier storm, or a weak upper-level disturbance that models barely detect until it's already producing severe weather. That's what makes these setups so difficult to forecast with precision, and why it's important to stay alert even when the morning outlook looks fairly quiet. It's not unusual for the Storm Prediction Center to show no highlighted risk areas in a Day 3 outlook, only to introduce multiple risk zones by the morning of the event as models finally pick up on those smaller scale features. That's actually happened this week. So when I say the next 7 to 10 days will be unpredictable, I'm not being vague, I'm being straightforward about how the atmosphere is behaving. Now, let's focus on the next 3 days, where the forecast is a bit more reliable. Starting with today, there's a slight risk of severe weather across Texas and Oklahoma, along with 2 separate marginal risk areas in the Great Plains, one near Omaha and another across parts of the southern plains. However, the region drawing the most concern today is the Tennessee Valley and Dixie Valley. A notable tornado risk is in place, affecting around 10 million people, from areas near Mobile and Huntsville, westward through Florence, into northwestern Mississippi near Tupelo, and extending north through western Kentucky up to Louisville. The main threats in the Tennessee Valley today will be isolated damaging winds along with a heightened tornado risk compared to other regions. The most critical window to watch is roughly between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m., when the strongest storm activity is most likely. There is some potential for supercell development across northern Alabama into southern Tennessee. If any of those storms remain isolated and don't quickly merge into a line, a brief tornado is possible. To be clear, this is not an extreme tornado setup, but it is a legitimate and elevated risk. If you are in that corridor from Huntsville to Louisville today, you should have a reliable way to receive warnings and know exactly where you'll take shelter before storms begin developing later this afternoon. Across the southern and central plains, the focus shifts more toward hail than tornadoes. A weak low-pressure system near South Dakota is expected to trigger clusters of storms capable of producing hail roughly the size of quarters to half dollars. This risk covers parts of Nebraska near Omaha and extends into central and eastern Kansas around Kansas City. The main window there is between about 4 p.m. and 8 p.m., typical late afternoon timing. It's not an unusually dangerous setup, but it's still something to take seriously. Further south in Texas and Oklahoma, clusters of thunderstorms are expected to develop this afternoon, with the primary concern being damaging winds. There's also the potential for large to very large hail if any storms organize into isolated supercells. However, high-resolution models suggest many of these storms may become outflow dominant, which would limit the tornado threat but increase the risk of strong winds. As we move into early Saturday morning, storms are expected to strengthen and push toward Oklahoma City and Dallas. These could bring overnight thunder, lightning, and gusty winds, so it's worth keeping weather alerts active while you sleep. Looking ahead to Saturday, the severe weather setup becomes more widespread but also more scattered. And in many ways, that kind of pattern is actually harder to communicate than a classic, well-defined outbreak. Storms are expected to be widespread on Saturday, stretching from Texas all the way to the Carolinas, and that really does mean a broad, active setup. Much of the central and southern plains, the southeast, including Missouri, Arkansas, and into Georgia, will see a generally stormy afternoon. That said, the overall severe weather risk looks relatively low-end and scattered. Most of the activity will be more spontaneous rather than organized. Damaging wind is the main concern across most areas, with isolated large hail possible in a few spots. A brief, spin-up tornado can't be completely ruled out, but the tornado threat appears low for Saturday. This is one of those situations where the risk is real enough that you shouldn't ignore it, but it's also not a day that calls for alarm. Conditions can change quickly. You might have clear skies one moment and a severe thunderstorm warning shortly after. That's just the nature of this pattern. It's a good idea to keep a weather app handy, leave alerts turned on, and stay generally aware while going about your day.